I can still remember it all, even now, a year later. The sky was blacker than it had ever been. It was a new moon, I remember. The lamps lined along the street were pitiful, barely lighting up the 6 inches of space directly below them. It was cold, too, so much so that even the thick robes I was wearing that night wasn't enough to keep me from shivering in them. I could have sworn at one point I'd started developing icicles out of the corners of my eyes. I'd been warned about this all the time as a kid, being out after dark here in Old Willow, and sure enough, I didn't take them seriously. It was the night, my bargain. I think I saw the first one of them just a mile or 2 out from the gates of the place. The fields, the sanctuary of the harvesters. He stood, watching me, a silent, lifeless sentry, with his hands held close together in the sleeves of his own robes. The wind was rushing, rustling through the leaves, but you wouldn't have been able to tell if you'd been looking at him. His cloak was as still as his body was. I kept walking, wanting more than anything to get this all out of the way so I could finally be free of the guilt. It had been all I could think about for the past few weeks or so by that point. The harvesters had, up to that point, always been something of an anomaly to us here in Weeping Willow, North Carolina. No one knew who any of them were, what they looked like, aside from their dark, velvetish robes and silent, menacing demeanor when they walked down the street. My friends and I, we'd always made up stories about who or what they were. Ethan always thought they were aliens, or the Illuminati, descending down as an omen of their impending takeover, or something like that. Norman and I both thought they were some satanic cult, or something, looking for their next sacrifice. Which, I suppose, wasn't altogether inaccurate after all, was it? Kathy Ann was the only one, though, who thought they weren't something outright evil, believing them instead to be angels or some shit. The lot of us were superstitious in our own rights, not at all helped by the hyper-religious upbringings of each of us. Sadly, God wasn't saving me this time, nor did it save them then. "Hey man," Ethan said into the phone that Friday night. "Happy early Halloween." Halloween. I asked before it hit me with the force of a freight train. Halloween was in 2 weeks. Oh shit, that's right. Oh dude, I groaned. What's the problem? Amnesia kicking in already, dude. It only comes every year. Yeah, but dude, I forgot that was in 2 weeks. And we haven't decided on where we're holding the party this year. Oh shit. There was a distinct pause that lasted about a full minute before he finally broke, saying, well, I mean, there's still 2 weeks. Yeah, but bro, you know good and damn well all the frats and shit have had their parties advertised for weeks up to now, and everyone's already RSVP'd. Him. Yeah, you might have a point. Another silence passed before he asked, well, why don't we just have a squad night out somewhere? What do you mean? I mean like, you know, you, me, Kat, and Norman all just go out and do something wild. Okay, I paused for a second and then said, you sound like you got something in mind. Well, sorta. What? So you know that old farmland? You mean old Haynes' place? Yeah. Of course. Whoa. Wait a minute. Oh hell no. You're not about to suggest what I think you're about to, are you? What? Oh God, Ethan. Dude, sometimes I seriously think you should have been held back a year or 2 back in elementary school. Bro, I haven't even said anything. You don't need to. You're talking about us going to Hell's Harvests, aren't you? Yeah. What's the big deal? I barked out a loon-like laugh. Are you fucking kidding me right now? Christ. You and I have grown up in this fucking place for over 20 years now, and it didn't occur to you once during the time it took you to come up with this little scheme that there might be a reason the place hasn't had visitors in over 30 years. Another moment of silence passed, one that I kind of needed after that. That freakout had me gasping for air afterwards. You done? He asked. I didn't reply. Look, I just thought it'd be something cool for us to do since you dropped the ball on our usual plans this year. Oh gee, thanks, pal. What? I'm just keeping it real with you. So that's your first idea. Hell's harvests. I don't see you coming up with anything. I opened my mouth, but froze. Exactly. Crickets. Look, have you even talked to the others about this? Even when I asked this, I knew this was a stupid question. He just came up with it. No, but I'll bet you they'd go for it. Shit, I know Norman will. I sighed. Fine. Ask them. See what they think. In the meantime, I'll try to think of something that isn't suicidal. That's a first. Screw you. That was one time. Two, dude. I grimaced. Seriously, I think you might have early onset of Alzheimer's or some shit. And I seriously think you should have been held back a couple of years. Whatever. I gotta get to class. Talk to you later. Yeah, later. I hung up after that. I sighed. Leave it to Ethan's dumb ass to come up with plans. I'll admit, I was genuinely terrified. To this day, I couldn't tell you what could have possessed this moron to think of wanting to hit up the old farmstead. I wasn't kidding, either, when I told him there was a reason the place had been abandoned for 3 decades. Long story short, the place had been where at least 130-something odd people, a good few of which were children, went missing, never to be seen again. How it happened, or what actually ended up happening to these people, as you can guess, no one actually knows. No traces ever found, and no witnesses to tell of it. By the 10th or 11th incident, most of us had enough of the sense God gave a fucking tree stump to know not to go trying to poke around there. Key word, of course, being most. So I spent the next day or two trying to find something. A haunted trail, a big-ass rave. Hell, fucking anything, to talk Ethan and them out of this. In the end, I managed to find something small. It was Halloween hour at Odin's Barrel, the bar just a couple miles out from the dorms, and so I figured that I could talk them down with a night of drinks and music. It was mine and Norman's old stomping grounds back in high school, when we'd sneak out with a couple of our other buddies, all of which are either dead or in prison now, and just knock back shots like we didn't have exams the next day. I say that to say, I figure I had this all handled. It was the Wednesday of that week that I pitched the idea to Ethan and the other two. I'm down for it, said Norman. Kathy Ann agreed with him. Ethan just gave me an annoyed sort of look, but shrugged, saying he was in. I couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief at this. The rest of that week then passed as normal, with them hitting me up every day, wanting to know either what costume to do or who was the DE. We ended up nominating Norman to be our driver, being the only one who's been actively avoiding alcohol for the past 5 years, ever since the night he ended up in a car crash that severely injured a child in the other car. Gas would be on me, while Ethan and Kathy Ann were gonna split the bill for tickets and drinks. For costumes, well, let's just say we kept the shit simple. I used some of my ex-girlfriend's old makeup, which she left at my place and never once came back for, in the 1.5 years since she left, to make myself into a basic zombie. Norman said he was going to bring back his Crypt Keeper costume from the previous year. Ethan said he wasn't going to dress up, but ended up coming along with a creepy clown costume he bought the previous day from Party City. It was a cheap one, too, nothing special. Definitely not worth the $15 he said he paid for it, in my opinion. Kathy Ann came dressed as a bumblebee. I remember mine and Norman's faces when we saw her too. It was hilarious. What? She asked. You. I said, stifling my laughter as hard as I possibly could. You look silly. What's wrong with a little buzz? She winked when she said this. We all laughed at this and were on our way to Odin's Barrel. We got there, knocked back a few drinks, enough for me and Ethan to get a good buzz going, and Norman was in the crowd, moshing, while Kathy Ann just watched at the bar beside me and Ethan, headbanging. It was a lot of fun, every bit as much as I remembered from back in high school. Before any of us three knew it, 12:30 rolled around, and it was time to call it for the night. Me and Ethan stumbled to the car, with Norman and Kathy Ann having to hold us up while we laughed our fucking asses off at absolutely nothing at all. Once we were all packed in the car again, that was when the question was brought up by a slurring Ethan. "So what are we gonna do now?" "What do you mean?" asked Norman. "Oh, come on, the night's still good, man. Let's go do something else." He turned and smiled at Kathy Ann and asked, "What about you, kitty cat?" He started giggling again and asked, "You wanna go do something else?" By this point, I was still in the middle of my own hysterical laughing fit, and so no, I couldn't just tell him to shut up. Norman, the voice of reason here, asked him like, "What, dude? Everywhere's closed." For a moment, his smile dropped and he said, "Oh yeah, shit. Look, it's late and I'm kinda tired. Why don't we just?" Ethan piped up again. "Wait, I know somewhere that isn't closed." "Like where?" He looked at me then and shouted, "Bro, Farmer Haynes's place." "What?" I asked, coming out of my laughing fit. "Farmer Haynes?" asked Norman. "You mean that old farmstead all the way down at the other end of town here?" "Yeah, man." "Why do you want to go there?" asked Kathy Ann. "It'd be awesome. Think about it. We'd be spending the night at a haunted farm on Halloween." This made Norman laugh. "Really, dude? What? Haunted farm? Jesus. Yeah, so how about it?" I just said I'm tired, man. Maybe next year. "I'm with Norman," chimed Kathy Ann. "This costume's starting to get kinda stuffy. You guys are a bunch of bums, man. What about you?" He looked at me again. Now I know I was drunk. Piss drunk. But I'd like to think even then I'd have known damn well better than to go and say some dumb shit like I did in that moment. I don't see why not. Norman looked in the rearview mirror at me, raising his eyebrow. I had to have been smiling, 'cause he rolled his eyes and replied, "Yeah, okay, whatever. Farmer Haynes it is." Ethan whooped and cheered, nudging both myself and an unamused Kathy Ann. Of course, despite everything I said, the world around me still hadn't settled back into place just yet, if you know what I mean. The full realization of what I'd just signed up for here hadn't quite clicked into place for me yet. No, that wouldn't happen for another 30 minutes after passing one of the signs along the old decrepit freeway reading, "Come on down to Farmer Haynes Harvests for the annual Weeping Willow Pumpkin Pickin'." Farmer Haynes Harvests. The hell? Why are we heading anywhere near? "Yo, Brad," Ethan said, nudging me and Kathy Ann, who was by then fast asleep. "Check it out." He pointed to his window toward the tall grass that ran along the fence line. I looked, squinting my eyes. "What? What am I supposed to check out here, dude? You don't see that out there, moving." "Moving?" I leaned closer to the window, squinting harder. "I don't see shit moving, dude. I think you had a couple too many Jaeger bombs. Bro, I'm serious. Look. I'm not seeing anything." "What's going on?" Norman asked. "I think I can see something following us out there." "Huh. Yeah, he's been watching us for the past mile and a half or so." "Who?" "I don't know. I just said it was some random guy out there in the grass." The car slowed and Norman turned to look. "Where at, Ethan?" he asked, leaning into the window like I was. "Right there. You don't see him. The tall, dark, skinny motherfucker right there." "Dude, I can't see shit." "Look, you're drunk and I'm tired. Can we please just—" "Wait a second," Kathy Ann chimed in. She leaned into Ethan's window now, squinting as well. "I think I can see him too." "Oh goddamn it. Not you too." "Norman, I'm not joking here." She leaned away from the window and started nudging me. "Brad, look, you see him." I remember looking at her, then at the window. All I could really see were the weeds, illuminated by the headlights. "I don't see anything, guys." "Well, we do, dude," Ethan said, unlocking his door. Norman just about jumped out of his seat and shouted, "Ethan, what the hell are you doing?" It was already too late, though. He was already hobbling out of the car and heading into the fields. Norman shouted for Ethan to get his ass back in the car, but Ethan might as well have been deaf. Kathy Ann was shouting for him too, undoing her own seatbelt to try and go out after him. But I held her back. It was when I did this that I actually started seeing something there at the fence. Now, obviously, I couldn't actually see much, but I knew I could make out two beady red dots glaring right back at me from above the fence line. The fence itself stood at least 4.5 feet tall, and they hovered over both it and Ethan, who was 6'0", by the way, meaning who or whatever this was had to be standing at least 6'5" or better. The dots didn't move, either. They remained locked on the car. Like I said, outside of this, I couldn't see or make out much of anything about it except for maybe a vague outline of a person. A very, very skinny person. Even this, though, I wasn't sure about, thanks to the fact that the headlights of the car didn't exactly do much to cast enough of a shadow or anything to distinguish its figure from the rest of the night sky. It wasn't until Ethan had reached the fence, only to then get swallowed by a flash of shadow in less than the time it takes to blink, that I, as well as the other two for that matter, were truly convinced someone was actually there. "Ethan!" Norman and I shouted, almost at the exact same time. Norman threw open the driver's side door and all but leaped out. He shouted for us to stay in the car and dashed off toward the fence. Kathy Ann tried calling for him to stop, but just like with Ethan before, it did no good. He reached the fence and called out for Ethan. By this point, I should mention, the figure was gone, appearing to have taken Ethan with it right after he vanished. "Ethan, where are you?" he cried. No answer from the fields. Kathy Ann broke from my hold around her and took off after Norman. The two then started shouting together for him. While they did this, though, I could see the figure return, and this time he brought friends. Two others, both tall, both dark, and both with a set of beady red eyes. All were coming right for Norman and Kathy Ann, and they couldn't even see them. "Norman, Kat!" I shouted, "Get out of there!" Kathy Ann turned around to look at me while Norman didn't seem to notice. I pointed to the right, and she looked, immediately jerking Norman back toward the car once she'd gotten a good look. They'd just about made it halfway back to the car when I saw the wave of darkness swipe Norman right out of Kathy Ann's grasp, just like it had with Ethan. In a flash, there it was, the figure, looming right behind Kathy Ann, who still hadn't even registered Norman's disappearance yet. I could see the figure then outstretch its lanky arm out, trying to grab her by her hair. Just before it'd have her too, though, she made it back inside the car, essentially throwing herself back inside and slamming the door, locking it. She quickly threw the driver door and locked it as well, but not before one of the figures managed to catch the door before it could close. Its hand was wedged between the door and the frame, with its gangly, gnarled-looking fingers facing upward in a fashion that allowed for them to curl up, grasping the frame. Kathy Ann had the idea to try getting the car moving again to get it to let go, but whenever she slammed on the pedal, the car would jerk, but it wouldn't move even an inch. Apparently, in spite of its otherwise emaciated appearance, this thing, whatever the fuck it was strong. Enough so to stall out Norman's Buick. Kathy Ann continued frantically slamming her foot on the gas until suddenly the figure outside sent its other lanky arm crashing through the window, palming and grabbing her face. That's when she started screaming and clawing to jerk herself away. To her credit, the figure actually struggled for a good moment to take her, but in the end, she was swept away like the other two. The last thing I remember her screaming was, "Brad, help me." With her gone now, the other two figures then focused on me. I didn't waste a second in undoing my seatbelt, opening my door, and hauling ass down the road. Obviously, I had no idea where I was going, where I was trying to go, nor did I really care. All that mattered was getting the fuck away from there and finding somewhere to hide. This was going to prove almost impossible, though, seeing as how everywhere around me was one big pitch black hole. I couldn't see or make out shit anywhere. I honestly feel like it was pure chance when I found the front gate of the farmland. Behind me, I could feel something like a rushing wind hitting me in the back. I didn't turn to look though, already damn near pissing myself as I ran at the thought of the thing's fingers grabbing my shoulder. I just kept running, praying to God that I could stay ahead of them. The front gate was wide open, like it had been for all that time up to then, with the dilapidated sign reading, just barely legibly, Farmer Haynes Harvests. I sprinted through. My goal, I think, was to find the farmhouse itself and try to hide out there. And before you ask, no, it did not occur to me the fact that I was literally running right into the turf of the people I was running from. That was just one of those things, you know, in the heat of the moment, you just forget shit like that. I did, anyways. Sure enough though, I actually managed to make it to the farmhouse and ran inside, where I slammed the door and bolted it shut. For about a minute or two, I stood with my back braced against the door, expecting them to batter it down like they did the window of the car. Sure enough though, that didn't happen. Instead, when I peeked around at the window, they were gone. That's when I finally backed away from the door and dug around in my pocket for my phone. My heart stopped though when I realized it wasn't in my pocket, either of them. I realized quickly that it must have slipped out in the car when I jumped out. With the option to call for help being ruled out, I immediately took to scouring the house for something, anything, to use as a weapon. I had to get out and get my friends back, and I was gonna have to fight to do it. Of course, being that this was a farmhouse, and a pretty beat-up one at that, options for weapons were pretty sparse, being pretty much limited strictly to either a rake or a damn gardening hoe. Figuring of the two, the rake was lighter in weight and could basically serve as a makeshift spear. I chose it. It was when I went to grab it, though, that I noticed something strange. Propping it up was what appeared to be a large rock slab or something, decorated with all kinds of plants and flowers. In itself, it wasn't anything that normally would have caught my eye, except for the fact that, even in the dim lighting, I could see that the vines seemed not just to decorate the rock, but grow from it as well. Small, spore-like openings in the rock had them actively growing, slithering out and all throughout the house itself. On top of it, though, I also saw a bunch of slips of paper, torn from a journal, along with this faded, worn-out-looking book. Some of the papers had these weird-looking drawings, symbols of some sort. I want to say Celtic or something like that, with one in particular standing out, a woman's face, made out of these plants. The others had things written on them, but in the dark, I obviously couldn't actually read any of the shit, so I took them in book instead to look at later under some light and headed back toward the door, rake in hand pointed outward, ready to gore the first one of those sons of bitches that tried coming for me. I peeked out the window and saw that the coast was clear before opening the door. Slowly, swinging my head from one side to the other as I went along, I left the house with the book and began making my way back to the car. I made it about 2 or 3/4 of the way there before I saw one of them again. I froze, raising my spear in defense. It didn't move.